You know how people talk about soulmates? The ones who complete you? The ones you feel destiny led you to? That was David for me. When I look back at our 10 years together, the first 9 were a masterpiece, a perfect blend of comfort and crazy adventure. He was my rock, my biggest cheerleader, and the man who made even a trip to the grocery store feel like a date. We had the quaint little house, the 2 rescue dogs, and the shared dream of finally remodeling the ancient kitchen before we hit 50. Everything was so perfectly, beautifully normal. Then came the end of that normal, the day the world fractured. It was a Tuesday. I remember the exact time, 10:17 a.m. I was on a conference call, fiddling with a pen, when the phone flashed with a name I didn't recognize, Officer Martinez. My first thought was a speeding ticket. David had a lead foot, always joking he was racing against time. My second thought, as I answered the call, was a cold dread that started in my stomach and quickly turned my limbs to ice. "Ma'am, I'm calling about a vehicle registered to a David Sterling." The words that followed are still a blur, a series of clipped, professional sentences that shattered my life into a million sharp pieces. David's car, his cherished, ridiculously fast vintage Mustang, had been found at the bottom of a ravine on a winding coastal road, about 3 hours north of our town. They said there was no sign of a struggle, no skid marks suggesting he tried to avoid anything, just a steep drop and the crumpled metal below. They searched. For 3 days they searched the surrounding area, the shoreline, and the wreckage. They found his wallet, his watch, the one I'd given him for his 30th birthday, and remnants of the car's interior. But no David. The official conclusion was that he'd succumbed to the sea or the impact, and his body had been taken by the currents. He was declared missing, presumed deceased. My world stopped spinning. The air left the room. Grief isn't just sadness, it's a physical weight, a suffocating blanket that refuses to lift. I spent the next 6 months in a fog. The scent of his cologne on an old sweater could send me spiraling for hours. The silence in the house, where there used to be his awful but endearing singing, was deafening. I became a ghost in my own life, navigating the paperwork, the memorial service, the pitying looks of our friends. The funeral, if you can call a memorial service for an empty casket that, was the hardest day of my life. My in-laws, bless them, were equally devastated. David was their only son. His mother, Elena, was inconsolable. She kept whispering about how he was snatched away too soon, how life was cruel. I held her hand, both of us united in this incomprehensible loss. But even amidst the crushing grief, a tiny, nagging feeling started to surface, a crack in the perfect facade of our life together. David had been different in the weeks before the crash, not distant, not angry, but restless. He'd take mysterious late-night phone calls that would stop the moment I walked into the room. He'd started traveling for work more frequently, always to places where communication was supposedly spotty. He said he was closing a huge deal, that he was working to set us up for life. I believed him, of course. Why wouldn't I? He was David. The morning he died, he'd kiss me goodbye like any other day, but he'd also left his favorite, beaten-up leather briefcase, the one he never traveled without, sitting right next to the front door. I dismissed it at the time as a tiny, forgivable oversight, but after the crash, after the silence, it started to bother me. Why leave the one thing that held all his important work? 6 months into my mourning, I forced myself to go through his things. The drawers, the closet, the dreaded home office. That's when I found the first anomaly. Tucked inside the leather briefcase, not files or contracts, but a cheap, prepaid cell phone. It was turned off. My hands were shaking as I powered it up. It lit up immediately, a flood of text messages and missed calls pouring across the screen. They weren't from clients. They were from someone saved simply as L. One text sent just 2 days before the accident stood out like a beacon of red light in the darkness. It read, "The plan is set. Don't look back. I'll be waiting for you in Havenwood. Love you." Havenwood. That name. It wasn't a place David had ever mentioned. It was just a small town, barely 45 minutes down the coast from where we lived, and the final words, "love you," weren't from me. The grief was instantly replaced by a searing, metallic taste of betrayal. The crushing weight didn't lift. It just changed its form, becoming sharp and dangerous. David hadn't accidentally driven off a cliff. He had planned it. He had left me, and he was alive. I sat there, the anonymous phone clutched in my hand, the man I'd cried over, the man I'd memorialized, suddenly transformed from a martyr into a monster. He hadn't just died. He had meticulously erased himself from my life and stepped into another. My first thought wasn't anger. It was a cold, terrifying resolve. I was going to Havenwood. Havenwood was exactly what the name implied, a haven. A small postcard-perfect town nestled by the sea, filled with brightly colored, well-maintained homes and a lazy, predictable pace of life. It was the kind of place people went to escape the chaos of the city, or, as I realized with a shudder, to escape their previous lives entirely. I drove there the next morning, the prepaid phone safely tucked into my glove compartment like a time bomb. I didn't tell anyone where I was going, not my sister, not my best friend, and certainly not Elena, David's mother, who was still sending me daily texts about how much she missed her poor, lost boy. I needed to see this lie for myself, to feel the dirt of the betrayal under my own fingernails before I could even begin to process it. My first thought was that David would be hiding, laying low. But the text to Elle suggested a confident plan, a new life, not a hiding place. I started logically. I pulled into a small coffee shop, the kind where everyone knows everyone, and pretended to be a tourist looking for real estate. I casually mentioned a man I was meeting, David Sterling. No one recognized the name. He was smart. He'd have a new alias. I changed tactics. I needed to find Elle. I sat in my car, staring at the message thread on the burner phone. The texts were mostly logistics, meeting times, reminders about a new bank account, and one thread detailing the purchase of furniture for a nursery. A nursery. He wasn't just starting a new life. He was starting a family. One of the last pictures sent to the phone was a blurry shot of a woman's hand resting on a stack of moving boxes, and in the corner, a distinct logo of a local Havenwood moving company. I drove straight there. The receptionist, a sweet older lady named Martha, was instantly chatty. I gave her a practiced smile and said I was trying to track down a cousin who had moved to town recently, an interior designer named Lisa. I described the woman in the photo. It was a shot in the dark, but luck, or perhaps divine fury, was on my side. "Oh, you mean Lisa Maxwell. She and her husband moved into the old lighthouse keeper's cottage on Mariners Lane a few months back. Lovely couple. Just had a baby, too. Their name isn't Sterling, dear. It's—" I cut her off, my heart hammering against my ribs, tasting bile in my throat. "Maxwell, that's right. I always mix up her married names. And the husband? What was his name? I managed to keep my voice steady, professional. Oh, that's Ethan. Ethan Maxwell. A dear man. Works from home. Something with investments. Ethan. A new identity. A new name. A new life. And the last name of the woman, Lisa Maxwell. The L from the text messages. It all snapped into place like the tumbler of a lock. I drove to Mariners Lane. It was a secluded street winding up a slight hill overlooking the bay. And there it was, the lighthouse keeper's cottage. It was charming, freshly painted, and felt sickeningly cozy. As I pulled my car onto the opposite side of the street, pretending to be admiring the view, a scene unfolded on the front porch that almost made me pass out. Ethan was there. He was wearing a ridiculously wholesome plaid shirt, laughing, holding a baby carrier. He looked 10 years younger, completely relaxed, without the heavy, burdened look he'd carried in the months before his death. He wasn't stressed. He wasn't miserable. He was happy. Then Lisa, L, stepped out of the house. She was beautiful, effortlessly so. Blonde hair tied back, holding a mug, rubbing David's shoulder. They shared a private, intimate joke. She leaned up and kissed him, a long, genuine, possessive kiss. And that baby. As David shifted the carrier, I caught a glimpse of the tiny, sleeping face inside. The nursery text suddenly had a physical presence. The child was maybe 3 months old. David had orchestrated his own death, abandoned his wife, and started a whole new family in less than 6 months. I stayed in the car for nearly an hour, watching the rhythm of their perfect stolen life. I watched David water the petunias, playfully tickle the baby's foot, and look at Lisa with a depth of love he hadn't shown me in years. He hadn't left me because he stopped loving me. He left me because he found something better. The rage that consumed me was cold, not hot. It wasn't the kind of anger that makes you scream and throw things. It was the kind that makes you quiet, meticulously organized, and deadly effective. I wasn't just Sarah, the grieving widow, anymore. I was Sarah, the betrayed investigator. I drove back to my own town that night, but the house felt foreign. The memories of David were tainted. I didn't just mourn a husband, I mourned a decade-long illusion. I started planning. I needed solid proof, not just for a divorce, but for justice. I needed evidence that would strip him of his new, clean slate. The first step was subtle. I knew David had changed his name, but had he changed his social security number or his financial fingerprint? He was an investment manager. He needed to access money. I remembered that years ago he had accidentally left a backup hard drive password hint in a shared cloud note. The hint? My biggest mistake? I had always assumed it was a coding error or a bad stock pick. Now I knew exactly what it was. I spent the rest of the week digging into the dark corners of the internet, using every skill I'd learned from years in digital marketing. I found tax records, property deeds for the lighthouse cottage, and the final confirmation. David Sterling was legally dead, but Ethan Maxwell was very much alive and operating under a newly created but financially linked entity. He had meticulously hidden his assets, but not well enough. And then a thought struck me, so chilling it made me gasp. What if David wasn't the only one who knew? What if someone from my old life had been helping him maintain the lie? The answer was right there, waiting in the wings of my broken marriage. The realization that David was alive brought a terrible clarity to my mind. If he could fake his death, he could do anything. But one thing kept gnawing at me, the logistics, a fake death, a new identity, property purchases, moving assets. That was too big for one person to manage flawlessly, especially one as prone to small mistakes as David. He needed an accomplice, someone close. I started reviewing every person who had been heavily involved in the memorial and the aftermath. His lawyer? Too clean. His best friend? Too stupid. Then I thought of Elena, David's mother, my beloved, inconsolable mother-in-law. Elena was the one who insisted on handling all the legal paperwork regarding the estate and the presumed death certificate. She said she wanted to protect me from the stress. I had been grateful. Now I saw it as meticulously controlled access. I remembered something peculiar from the memorial service. When the official from the coroner's office gave the final grim details about the wreckage, Elena had looked not sad, but strangely satisfied. I dismissed it then as the relief of closure. Now it looked like triumph. I needed proof. Elena still frequented our house, ostensibly to check on me, but mostly to keep David's memory alive. I knew she kept a spare key to the ancient safety deposit box David had inherited from his father. It was a dusty metal box we barely used, supposedly holding old war bonds and birth certificates. The next day, while Elena was at her weekly bridge game, I slipped into her house. I knew exactly where she hid the key, in a porcelain teapot she claimed was too ugly to steal. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from the sickening adrenaline of potential discovery. The contents of the box were not old bonds. They were a stack of cashier's checks, all dated in the 2 months leading up to the crash. They were large sums, all paid to a shell corporation I recognized from the Havenwood property deed, Maxwell Investments, LLC. The final damning piece of evidence was a signed, notarized power of attorney document, dated 3 days before David's disappearance, giving Elena full control over the last of David's life insurance and liquidation of his personal stocks. She hadn't just known. She was the architect. She had cleared the financial path for her son to vanish, effectively stealing David's future from me and giving it to him and Elle. The confrontation needed to be perfect. I couldn't just accuse her. I had to force an admission. I invited Elena over for dinner the following evening. I cooked her favorite meal, a complicated French dish David always teased me about. I was the picture of the resilient widow, slightly too cheerful, slightly too strong. She looked pleased. As we were having dessert, the air thick with false pleasantries, I leaned forward, my voice barely a whisper. "Elena, I've been going through some of David's old things, trying to find closure." She patted my hand. "Oh, darling, you're so brave. Your poor husband gone too soon." I took a deep breath. I found his old briefcase, the one he left by the door, and inside there was a prepaid phone. It had a text message about Havenwood and meeting Elle. Her face didn't crumble with shock. It went dead, carefully blank. "I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah." "Probably a client he was dealing with." "No, Elena. I know about Havenwood, I know about Lisa Maxwell and Ethan, and I know about the Maxwell Investments LLC checks you signed." The blank facade shattered. Her eyes narrowed, the pity replaced by a chilling hatred. She didn't deny it. "He's happy, Sarah," she hissed, abandoning the gentle act entirely. "Truly happy. Something you never made him." I felt a cold rush. "You helped him fake his death? You watched me mourn? You comforted me while you knew your son was just 45 minutes away starting a new family? David wasn't cut out for your perfect dull life," she spat out. You wanted the quiet house and the 2 dogs. He wanted adventure. He wanted a son, not just the idea of one, the real thing. Lisa gave him that. I gave him the chance to finally be free. That was the deepest cut, the truth about our childlessness. David and I had struggled with fertility for years. It was a silent, painful spot in our marriage. David always pretended it didn't matter, but Elena, with her cruel words, confirmed it was his ultimate reason for leaving. He chose to be a father to someone else's child, and you call that freedom? I asked, my voice dangerously level. It is his child, Elena declared, leaning into the lie. Lisa's son is David's son. That's why he left. He wanted a real legacy, not a broken dream with you. I stood up, the chair scraping loudly across the wooden floor. I didn't need to ask for details about the crash. The motive was crystal clear. He wanted out, and his mother was his willing executioner. You are both going to pay for this lie, I stated, pulling my own phone from my pocket and pressing a button. A small, faint red light was visible on the corner of the dining room mantelpiece. I recorded this entire confession, Elena. Every word. The police, the insurance companies, and the court are going to hear exactly how you helped David Sterling stage his death. You wanted him to be free? I'm going to make sure he's behind bars. Elena's face went pale. The triumph was gone, replaced by sudden, paralyzing fear. My grief was over. The game had just begun. My conversation with Elena was the turning point. The recorded confession wasn't just a legal weapon. It was the final, undeniable proof that the man I married was a calculating monster, and his own mother was his shield. The next 48 hours were a whirlwind of legal consultation. My lawyer, a brilliant, stone-faced woman named Ms. Chen, told me we had a slam-dunk case for insurance fraud, identity theft, and obstruction of justice. But I didn't want the police to step in yet. I needed my own closure first. I needed David to look me in the eye. I drove back to Havenwood, this time not as a nervous investigator, but as the storm that was about to break. I parked my car just out of sight of the lighthouse cottage. It was a Saturday afternoon, the kind of day David and I used to spend doing yard work and planning future vacations. I walked up the cobbled path, the sound of my own footsteps loud in the sudden silence of the street. I didn't knock. I didn't announce myself. I simply reached the front door, turned the brass handle, and pushed. It was unlocked. A detail David, always meticulous about security, would never have allowed, unless he felt utterly safe in his new life. The living room was immaculate. Pastel colors, baby toys neatly organized in a wicker basket, the scent of lavender and fresh bread. It was the perfect domestic scene, a stark, painful contrast to the house I was mourning in. David, Ethan, was sitting on the floor, laughing as he built a ridiculously complex block tower with a toddler, a little boy who looked around 2 years old. Not the baby I'd seen in the carrier. This was an older child, and he had David's unmistakable shock of dark hair. The noise of the door startled him. His head snapped up. When he saw me, Sarah, the dead man's widow, his face drained of all color. The block tower tumbled down unnoticed. Sarah? What are you doing here? His voice was a strangled whisper, the confidence of Ethan Maxwell instantly dissolving back into the panicked, guilty David Sterling. I stepped fully into the room. I came to congratulate you, David. It seems your plan worked perfectly. You have the house, the perfect life, the new name, and the children. Lisa emerged from the kitchen, a confused look on her face, carrying the baby I had seen before. She was beautiful, but her eyes, when they focused on me, were instantly guarded. "Ethan, who is this?" she asked, clutching the baby closer. I didn't let David speak. "I'm Sarah. David Sterling's wife. His real wife. The one he abandoned after staging his death a year ago." The air went dead silent. Lisa's mug dropped from her hand, shattering on the wooden floor. The little boy on the carpet started to cry, sensing the sudden, terrible shift in the atmosphere. Lisa turned her fury on David. "Ethan? What is she talking about? David? Who is David?" David finally stood up, his face a mask of terror and forced aggression. "She's delusional, Lisa. A stalker. I told you about my crazy ex, remember? Get out, Sarah. I'm calling the police." "Call them," I challenged, reaching into my handbag and pulling out the prepaid phone. "Call them and explain why your mother wired large sums of money to your Maxwell Investments LLC account 3 days before you supposedly drove off a cliff." I then looked directly at Lisa, whose face was a horrifying mixture of confusion and dawning horror. "Lisa, let me ask you something. When did David tell you he got divorced? Or did he tell you he was single the whole time?" Lisa's voice was barely a squeak. He said he was single, that he moved here for a fresh start after a painful breakup years ago." She looked at the 2-year-old clinging to David's leg. "That's his son, Sarah. Our son, Jack. And this is Lily. We've been together for 3 years. 3 years. That meant he had started his new life while still married to me, long before the crash. The affair wasn't a sudden impulse. It was a slow, deliberate construction of an escape route." "He's a liar, Lisa," I said softly, the anger now mixed with a strange, cold pity for this new victim. "He didn't want me because I couldn't give him what he wanted. He wanted an heir, a family, and he needed his mother to clear the path for him to find one." David lunged forward, not to defend himself, but to snatch the phone. "Give me that. You have no right." I sidestepped him easily, keeping the burner phone out of reach. "Oh, I have every right. I have the right to be free of the man who forced me to grieve for his death. I have the right to expose the coward who lied to everyone he claimed to love." "I did it for my children," he shouted, desperation making him ugly. "I did it for them to have a stable life. I didn't want to hurt you, Sarah, but you were never going to let me go quietly." "So you staged a fatal accident?" I whispered, shaking my head in disbelief. "You chose to be a dead hero rather than an honest man." Before he could answer, before Lisa could speak, I turned to the 2 children. The toddler, Jack, was sobbing, scared by his parents' raised voices, and the baby, Lily, was looking at me with wide, innocent eyes. I pulled out my phone again, not the burner one, but mine, and pressed play. Elena's recorded voice filled the perfect living room, clear and chilling. "He's happy, Sarah. He wanted a son. I gave him the chance to finally be free." David froze. Lisa gasped, sinking slowly onto the kitchen floor. The moment of truth, the climax of the lie, was hanging in the air, captured forever. I had my proof, and now I had my revenge. The air in the lighthouse cottage was thick with the chilling sound of Elena's voice, detailing her son's conspiracy. When the recording finished, the silence that followed was absolute, save for the pathetic cries of the toddler. David's face was no longer that of the happy father, Ethan. It was the desperate face of a trapped man. He looked at Lisa, then at the children, and finally, His hollow gaze rested on me. "You won't get away with this, Sarah," he snarled, resorting to the last weapon of a narcissist, false intimidation. "I already have," I replied, my voice steady. I pulled out my phone again and dialed the number of Ms. Chen, my lawyer. "They're here." The evidence is secured. I didn't wait around for the police sirens, though I knew they would arrive quickly. My revenge wasn't about watching him get handcuffed. It was about the fundamental act of exposing his lie and reclaiming my own truth. I looked at Lisa one last time. She was weeping, the shattered mug and the scattered blocks symbolizing the destruction of her own perfect, stolen family. She had been betrayed too, albeit by a man who had already perfected the act of betrayal. "He is a dead man, Lisa," I told her quietly. "He doesn't exist anymore. Not as a husband, not as a father, not as a name on a lease. You need to protect your children from the consequences of his fraud." I walked out of the cottage, leaving David Sterling to face the ruin of his two families. As I drove away from Havenwood, I saw the flashing lights of the patrol car turning onto Mariners Lane. The sight didn't give me the triumphant rush I expected. Instead, it gave me a quiet, profound sense of release. The weight of the lie, the weight of the grief, had finally lifted. The legal process was swift and brutal. David Sterling, also known as Ethan Maxwell, was arrested on charges of insurance fraud, obstruction of justice, and identity theft. The recorded confession from Elena was the anchor of the prosecution. She was also charged as an accessory. The insurance companies, who had paid out a hefty sum on David's life insurance policy, were furious and aggressive. They demanded repayment of the funds, which led to the immediate seizure of David's assets, including the lighthouse cottage and every dollar in his Maxwell accounts. Lisa was left with nothing but the truth and two small children. She contacted me eventually, not with anger but with despair. She had genuinely believed David's story and had been blindsided by his monstrous deception. We never became friends, but we shared a silent, terrible bond as the women he had systematically lied to. I helped her connect with legal aid, advising her on how to distance herself and the children from the fallout of David's crimes, specifically making sure her name was cleared of any complicity. As for David, his punishment wasn't just the jail time he received, it was the complete, irrevocable collapse of the life he had murdered his old identity to achieve. He lost both his son Jack and his daughter Lily, as Lisa changed their surnames back to her maiden name and moved far away to start her life over, determined to sever all ties with the man who had built their life on a mountain of lies. His mother, Elena, got probation and a hefty fine, but the real blow was the public shame and the destruction of her relationship with her only son, whom she had tried so desperately to save. I finalized my divorce on the grounds of severe emotional distress and fraud. There was no settlement to fight for. Every cent David had was gone, either seized by the government or tied up in restitution. I didn't care about the money. I had my freedom. Today, a year and a half after the confrontation, I live in a different house, in a different part of the country. I sold the one where I mourned a dead man and bought a place where I could celebrate a new, real life. I look at pictures of the man I loved, David Sterling, and I no longer see my soulmate. I see a phantom, a beautifully constructed lie that I finally had the strength to tear down. I learned a terrible truth. People aren't always who they pretend to be, and sometimes The deepest betrayal comes not from a stranger, but from the person sleeping right beside you. But I also learned something about myself. I wasn't just the grieving widow. I was the one who uncovered the plot, faced the monster, and sought the justice that allowed me to finally, truly live again. And that, I realized, was a story worth telling. Thank you for listening to this difficult confession. We are so grateful to share these stories with you. If this story resonated with you, please hit the like button and share your thoughts in the comments section below.